I'd like to talk this afternoon about joy and gladness. Maybe you can watch in your own being if there's any joy and gladness about the possibility of hearing about joy and gladness. Oddly, perhaps, one of the difficult emotions that we encounter might actually be joy or gladness or happiness or ease. Some of you have noticed that in your interviews. Oh, I get to ease and I kind of tune out. And it can it just seems sort of odd, perhaps. But there actually can be lots of reasons. It's a whole separate talk and maybe a whole book or something about why it would be hard for us to experience joy or gladness. We can misunderstand the teachings. The Buddha says, I teach about suffering. We're supposed to be serious about this. Joy and gladness, like everything else, are impermanent and they change. And so we have the suffering of these two are not something, at least in the ordinary realms. In the extraordinary realms, they are something to rest in. But in the ordinary realms, they're impermanent and they keep changing. And so sometimes we'd rather not have to deal with that kind of loss. And so we just, don't bother at all. There can be conditioning. Some of you also have mentioned in your interviews, different kinds of conditioning. Maybe in your spiritual practices as children or in your families where there was a lot of burden or struggle, and noisy, joyful, glad children were seen as problems. So it's like, don't be too happy, don't be too loud. We can imagine that we can either have joy and gladness or difficulty, but they can't coexist. That we can't be both, even as I speak, deeply sorry that Hugh isn't here, and perfectly happy to be here doing what I'm doing. And they're both here. They're just both here. And so sometimes we can imagine that, sort of like it's an either-or kind of deal. That either we're happy or we're not. We can have struggles with joy or gladness if we've had a history of trauma, which actually activates the nervous system to be on the lookout for problems. Really vigilant all the time. Like an antelope that has had one too many lions in the bushes. It's just a little skittish. Better to not relax too much. And we can have come to identify with that state. This is who I am. We've even been able, perhaps, to be addicted to that state. This is where I'm comfortable. I get a little antsy, I get a little uncomfortable when I'm actually happy. So just a couple of the reasons why it might be hard. Why it might be hard. You probably have your own. So I want to talk a little bit about the Buddha's teachings and about the sort of generally about the goodness of joy and happiness. It'll be part of the talk. And then part of the talk will be looking at 5, oh, that's so silly, 5 kinds of joy or happiness. Silly in that, of course, there aren't just 5. But there we are. So the sort of general piece, the Dalai Lama says, you've heard it a million times, the purpose of life is to be happy. And he's not saying it like, the purpose of life is to be happy, and I don't know what your problem is. That isn't what he means. What he means is the purpose of life is to cultivate, to learn how to rest in happiness, and in particular, a happiness that is ever more deep, ever more reliable, ever more secure. There are some kinds of happiness that are perfectly fine as long as we recognize. Come on up, Laura, it's okay. We want you to be happy in your own seat. As long as we recognize that there are certain limitations to some kinds of happiness, but it doesn't mean they're wrong. It just means they're limited. And sometimes the struggles we get into about happiness have to do with trying to make, something that just is limited into something that is not so limited. And that's where we get into trouble. Trying to make, bonbons, having enough bonbons. Although that might be all right, actually. But to have enough chocolate that I could finally, ultimately, really be permanently satisfied and happy. So we try to make things give us some kind of larger sense and deeper sense of happiness that just don't have that capacity. That's the problem. There's nothing wrong with chocolate. At least today, according to the dietary norms. But anyway. This is Sharon Salzberg. She says, this is why we practice meditation, so that we can treat ourselves more compassionately, improve our relationships with friends, family, and community, live lives of greater connection, and even in the face of challenges, stay in touch with what we really care about, so we can act in ways that are consistent with our values, so that we can be happy. The process is one of continually trying to greet our experience, whatever it is, with mindfulness and kindness and compassion. It helps us to realize that everything changes constantly and to be okay with that. The effort we make in meditation is a willingness to be open, to come close to what we have avoided, no matter what it is. To be patient with ourselves and others, and to let go of our preconceptions, our projections, and our tendency to not live fully. The purpose of life, the Dalai Lama says, is to be happy. And so the Buddha taught us to recognize qualities of mind and heart, practices, behaviors that could possibly lead to happiness. And these qualities are actually always present. They're always available to us. We don't have to be somebody different or special. We don't have to have a different childhood. We don't have to fix ourselves. They're immediately available to us. And our practice really is about cultivating the capacity to see through our misunderstandings, our misperceptions, and the ways that we don't trust in those zinnia seeds. We don't trust in those radish seeds. And so we don't cultivate them well. because we don't believe that really that scrawny looking little thing could possibly bear fruit. So the goal of our practice, as I was saying yesterday, is to develop a mind and heart that is balanced, coherent, flexible. The kind of happiness that is kind of that ordinary level of happiness, and that can allow us to drop into those deeper states of happiness. As the Buddha called us uninstructed worldlings, he did a lot. I love that. You, Sharon, are an uninstructed worldling. I'm like, yeah, I think you're right. I think I get it. But he called us uninstructed worldlings who don't understand, how things really work and what it is that, will make us happy. Somebody asked one time, I was at a meditation retreat, and somebody asked Shinzen Yang, he said, well, can you be enlightened by happiness, by pleasure? You talk about, working with suffering and working with difficulty. He says, can you work with pleasure in the same way? And Shinzen said, absolutely. He said, the only problem with it is that it's harder. And the reason that it's harder, you already know. When we're suffering, we kind of start looking around for, isn't there another way to do this? But when we've got a lot of bonbons, when we're kind of, pretty happy, we're like, okay, maybe just one more would be good enough. That the challenge, he said, is that pleasure is so much harder to see through the limitations of pleasure. That's another whole talk, by the way. But for example, let's say I imagine that having a lot of bonbons is really the way to happiness. That's not such a long stretch. But anyway, it's sooner or later, I'm going to be like, okay, all right, already, enough bonbons, huh? That it's going to turn icky. That it just won't work. It just won't be satisfying. So we imagine that maybe there's some quality of sense pleasure that could make us happy. Enough perfect summer days, enough cardinals singing in the morning, enough perfect husbands who wash the dishes all the time, enough mothers who understand us well, enough sleep, enough, whatever it is, that there's enough pleasure in life that could kind of get us to a state of perfect happiness, or some sense of perfect security or perfect safety in this realm, that we can kind of get ourselves so that, okay, now I got it, and it's not going to change. All right, I got it. All right, I got it. And so we imagine we kind of keep looking for that kind of stability, or that there's some sense, some capacity that we have as human beings for absolute justice or absolute recognition, or absolute perfection in the world. And it just isn't like that on this planet. You've heard me quote Jack Kornfield any number of times, because Jack says, if you want it to be different, you have to be born on a different planet. I'm sorry, it's too late for that, Because life on this planet doesn't work like that. It just doesn't. It's not your fault. It's not anybody's fault. It's not comprehensible. We don't know why. Stop trying to figure it out. Just know it doesn't work like that. It's not doable. So to get life to work out on our own terms, internally or externally, it just isn't doable. To have everything ultimately cleaned up and to stay that way, to have all that stuff that's reported in the Washington Post only be perfect news, not going to happen. Not on this planet. Just not going to happen. So the Buddha invites us into a radically different approach to happiness. Radically different understanding of it. He invites us to discover that while we can have pleasure in conditioned things, he never said you're not allowed to have pleasure in conditioned things. Doesn't teach that at all. We think sometimes he did, but he didn't. You can have pleasure in conditioned things, but just know that they're conditioned and they're therefore limited. So the teachings are a recipe. It's sort of like a recipe that says you have all these ingredients in your cupboard. Here's how to work with them. Here's how to work with them. Sometimes we want to know, okay, now, we have ingredients in our cupboard. Now, exactly today, let's see, ingredients for gray sky, maybe it'll rain. What are the ingredients for that again? That we want to imagine that there's a recipe, that says, for every circumstance, again, the refrigerator magnet, that there's a recipe that says, here's what to do here. I was thinking, sort of like, okay, I don't know why I come up with these airplane metaphors. I know nothing about airplanes. But it's sort of like, you take off in the airplane and the question is, should you go left or right? Well, folks, it depends. It depends. You have to have a good skill at flying the airplane and reading whatever's going on. And you have to have good ground control that helps you with that, It says, Sharon, by the way, there's a plane coming in at, 800 degrees or whatever. And so the ground control really is that part of our bodies that kind of tell us what's good for us, what's useful. Those four little nerves that kind of go upward, and that we have to listen to the experience of our bodies that tell us what to do. And then, the skill and the understanding is our conceptual mind that is also helpful. I know how to turn left if I need to, but it doesn't know everything. And so can we have, a way of using the ingredients, using all these ingredients, but being skillful with them in any given moment. In one of the suttas, it's a Sutta, which is a sutta, called Sutta, Suda, the Sutta Sutta, which is about a cook. And in it, the Buddha tells a story about this, what does he call it? He says, I think he calls him a foolish, inexperienced cook who only knows about the ingredients in the soup. He knows about the different kinds of curry, knows a lot about the different kinds of curry, and he puts these ingredients in the soup. But what he doesn't do is he doesn't look at his master and see what the master likes, what's good, what's wholesome, what's working. He doesn't even taste the soup, But in particular, he doesn't look to see what the master likes. And so he says, that's foolish and inexperienced. So you can be very mindful about putting red curry in your soup, but if it's not what's called for, then it's not being a skillful cook. It's a really lovely sutta. You might want to look it up, the Sutta, because he's just talking about that challenge of really finding our own guidance system about where is suffering, where is the end of suffering, where is happiness, and how does this work for me here, now, this minute, this circumstance, today, which might be totally different from what it was yesterday. So it's not an ordinary understanding. It's a path of mystery, like the path of planting a zinnia seed. It makes no sense to plant a zinnia seed. It just doesn't make sense at all. It's mysterious. but it works. Putting water on it? Really? Really? That's stupid. But it works. So the path is a path of mystery, and experimenting with it, discovering that it works, and seeing for ourselves how to cook in this circumstance, right here. And working with seeing what's an obstacle, seeing where we get into greed, where we get into like, it has to work the way I want it to work. Or where we get into aversion, it can't possibly work that way. Or into delusion. Huh? What? What? Who? What? It's too much work. That's delusion. Kind of it's just too hard. It's just too hard to figure out. I think I'll just go to sleep. Okay, so happiness, joy, gladness, cultivating, allowing, enjoying, deepening. That's our practice. Sometimes we practice by removing the obstacles. That's what we work with when we get stuck in a difficult emotion of difficulty, of unpleasantness. We remove the obstacles. And when we get stuck in not allowing joy and happiness, we remove the obstacles. So much of our practice is really about obstacles and removing them. But no, that's not what I want to talk about. I want to talk about the different kinds, if you will, of happiness and cultivating them. The first kind, the Buddha really didn't talk about all that much. Some people would say he didn't talk about it at all. I don't think that's quite true. And there are perfectly sensible reasons why he didn't, which I will not go into because that's another whole talk. But and it's the level of just ordinary goodness, if you will, the level of bonbons or summer days or cardinals in the trees or grass under your feet or good soup. The level of ordinary sensory goodness, having and also having a coherent nervous system, having a nervous system that kind of doesn't fight itself, where our heads and our emotions and our bodies are not at war with each other. The happiness of just feeling kind of in that middle place of being balanced, of being able to be curious, not overwhelmed, and not completely, by too much information and not shut down. And so cultivating, and I'm actually talking about sort of two different things, but they're in the world of form. They're both in the world of form. So cultivating happiness in the world of form. Having a body and a mind that work well together and enjoying simple, ordinary sensory pleasure. And if we don't allow ourselves to do that, and again, there might be perfectly good reasons why I named some of them at the beginning, why we've gotten off track about that if we don't allow ourselves in some place as actively cultivate as a spiritual practice, the capacity to allow ourselves that kind of joy and gladness, we won't have enough gas for the journey. We won't have enough food for the journey. It'll be like the Buddha sitting there, starving himself to death, that he didn't have enough physical and mental coherence to even be able to think straight, much less, see enlightenment. So if we don't cultivate those qualities of gladness that are just ordinary world of form, we won't have that capacity. And if we don't include that quality, what we can end up with is a practice that's too austere. That's just dry and hard. Sometimes when we actually are having difficulty with practicing, it's like Sharon, you really should practice more, you know. You should practice longer, and you should practice more often, and you should, those little speeches we give ourselves. Sometimes, not always, but sometimes, when we're having difficulty bringing ourselves to practice, it's because there isn't enough ease in it. We're not allowing ourselves enough joy. And that's why the very first guided meditation I offered you, I said, pay attention, bring awareness to the breath, and in particular, let yourself notice any qualities of goodness or ease. And for some of us, that's easy to do. In fact, for some of us, it's like, okay, fine, let's only notice the qualities of ease. That isn't what I said. But, but for others of us, it's like, really? That's allowed? Really? So that to kind of have that quality of balance, that we can nourish ourselves with a quality of ordinary sensory, physical coherence, sensory pleasure in the world, that we can nourish ourselves with those, and without that we won't have enough gas. And, here's Ayakima about that. She says, anyone who has not purified herself very much might not even notice those things, might not even notice the cardinal in the trees, might not even notice that the sun has come out, might not even notice, how good it feels to have the grass on your feet or whatever. You might not even notice. They may never look at the sky or the greenery. They may search for pleasant contact through much grosser possibilities like drink or drugs. Indulgence in food or sex might seem their only obvious source of enjoyment. And we can see that in the world, don't we? Alas, we see that in much of popular culture. And paradoxically, it's because people don't allow themselves to experience the wholesome pleasures of goodness, that they desperately seek it someplace else. I've heard a lot of people talk about addictions as a spiritual crisis, It's that longing for goodness, but looking for it, if you will, in all the wrong places. I want to make a note here because I referenced trauma earlier, and sometimes we need some specialized help with this one, especially if we have a history of trauma, because the conditioning around vigilance and not relaxing, not having ease, can be very, very compelling and very, very strong. The way we learn how to navigate coherence, by coherence I just mean that kind of balance, as children, is to have a safe enough environment and to have parents who are regulated enough that without even saying anything, they help us learn how to do that. So if for some reason that didn't happen well, probably because it didn't happen well for them either, and they can't do that for us, we need the help of relationship, something that's sort of bigger, if you will, than ourselves, to kind of help us learn how to relax the vigilance a bit and trust in the experience of gladness or goodness. So just a note there, and it's not our fault if we can't do that ourselves. It's, again, sorry, it's the rules on this planet. You did get a copy, right? When you came in, these are the rules on the planet. This is just how it works. That we need relationship in order to cultivate the capacity to take in goodness. So either we have enough of that internally that we can offer that quality of relationship to ourselves, or we need to seek it out someplace else. Fair enough. Fine. Hey, no problem. Lucky for us currently in our culture now is that we have so many wonderful resources, almost too many. We have so many wonderful resources, lots and lots of ways of working with it. There's body work and energy work and shamanism and psychology and all sorts of great stuff. And friendship. Oh, that. So the question is, what is needed now? And to really respect that sometimes what is needed can be something really fundamental like that. I think, by the way, just a little footnote, sometimes we read about spiritual teachers who are very advanced and they, run into like trouble. They don't behave well, or, they kind of look for their satisfaction in unfortunate ways. And I think what has happened is that they have tried to use their spiritual practice by bypassing their own kind of just human needs, and they don't know how to navigate them when they rise. And so they get into trouble because they get into addictive kinds of relationships with their senses. Anyway, that's another whole talk. Ajahn Chah says, he talks about this kind of happiness is like the peel of a banana. He says, the banana needs that peel in order to grow. It wouldn't be fair to say to this little baby banana, say, okay, fine, peels aren't necessary, you don't eat it, so we're just going to discard the peel. But it needs the peel in order to grow. Now, he says you don't eat the peel. So at some point, you look more deeply, but it doesn't mean that there's something wrong with the peel. So the question at times might be, do I need a little more sweetness, a little more sukha? We talk about dukkha, but sukha is the Pali word for sweetness. Do I need a little more sweetness in my practice in order for it to function well? And so, you notice perhaps on retreat that we try to kind of dance with that a bit. And of course we can fall over in one extreme or another. It's like, well, the rules aren't really tight, so therefore nothing matters, right? Well, that's not true. But the rules could be so tight that it gets austere and really too harsh. And can we have the wisdom to see what's needed at any given point? So the other 4 qualities of happiness are things that the Buddha taught very actively about. And each of them, as I go forward, is inviting a deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper, or higher and higher, if you want to say it that way, kind of happiness, a higher quality. The second one is what Ayakima calls the bliss of blamelessness. It's the bliss of not feeling guilty or remorseful about behaving badly. And when we really pay attention, our internal systems kind of know, don't they, when we're not really quite nailing it in speech or thought or action, because it doesn't feel good. It might feel good immediately for me to shoot off that nasty email. But you know what would happen next? I'd worry about what the next thing was that was going to happen. There wouldn't be ease. Whereas if I send off a wholesome email, there's the bliss of blamelessness. It's like, sweetheart, I'm just telling you, here's my experience, and here's the deal. Here's what I would like. I don't have to apologize for anything. So the bliss of blamelessness. And he spoke often about the precepts. And in the West, we tend to kind of not pay attention to the precepts too much. For some of us, it can kind of feel like, those rules that we had in school that say, you have to do this. You have to be a good girl or a good boy, and if you're not, you're going to be punished. And that's not really how it's meant or what it's like. All it means is that it's not like you're punished exactly. It's that if you behave badly, you don't feel good. If I send off that yucky email, I'm not like punished for it. I guess I might be, but that's not the point. The point is, even if I get what I want, I still don't really feel good about it, you know? It doesn't really allow for the opening of a really deep happiness. So karmically, if you will, okay, that's another talk. But karmically, it doesn't lead to deeper happiness. But then the challenge is how to not turn those precepts against ourselves. Make them like a stick, that we beat ourselves up about if we haven't done it properly. This is from Ram Dass. He says, as you further purify yourself, your impurities will seem grosser and larger. Isn't that wonderful? Understand that it's not that you're getting more caught in the illusion, it's just that you're seeing it more clearly and having more opportunity to change it. So there's a difference between discernment and seeing clearly what works and what doesn't, and judgment and shaming ourselves, criticizing ourselves. So we cultivate the precepts. We cultivate as a way of deepening our capacity for happiness, deepening our capacity for happiness. Deepening our happiness at one level and also deepening our capacity. We can't really be happy if we're behaving badly. Many of you, I've used this analogy way more times than I should because it's getting old. But years ago, there used to be a program called The Sopranos. Some of you may have seen it, in which this mafia boss goes to therapy because he's unhappy. Now, go figure. This guy is murdering people, stealing every time he gets a chance, engaging in all kinds of illicit sexual behavior, using people, and he wants therapy so he can be happy? It's like, really? Really? Is there a therapist who can help that? So sometimes we kind of have this delusion that we can make it work. And the Buddha is saying, sorry, no, rules. That's rule number 427. Did you read that one? No, on this planet, no, don't work that way. Sorry, don't work that way. So, morality, the bliss of blamelessness, Ayakima calls it. The third one is the delight and wholesome qualities of mind and heart. Cultivating a mind that is ever more free of the toxins of greed, of hatred, of delusion. Ayakima refers to this kind of mind as living in heaven on earth. Happiness that is independent of what is happening outside and depends only on the qualities of our own minds and hearts. And we cultivate these qualities: generosity, virtue, letting go, wisdom, energy, patience, truthfulness, kindness, equanimity. We actively cultivate these qualities of mind and heart. The Buddha very explicitly, I can point you to the passages, very explicitly says, not only cultivate your own virtues, but contemplate your own virtues. Contemplate how it feels to be generous. Contemplate the fact that you are grateful and how it feels. Contemplate means noticing the experience in the body. So contemplate how it feels to be virtuous. So we are cultivating, deepening these qualities of wholesomeness in the mind and heart. So part of our practice is cultivating those qualities as a way of deepening our capacity for happiness. Ajahn Suchito talks of them as qualities that enable one to cross life's floods. I love that. Life has a lot of floods in it. And these qualities of mind and heart are qualities that enable one to cross life's floods. So when difficult things happen, it's like, practicing for that 3 seconds before the end of the ball game, and you have to shoot a three-point shot. Having cultivated these qualities of mind and heart, give us the juice, if you will, give us the resources to cross life's floods when they arise. This is Matthew Ricard. He says, so long as we are slaves to the dissatisfactions and frustrations that arise from the confusion that rules our minds, it will be just futile to tell ourselves, I'm happy, or be happy, over and over. The search for happiness is not about looking at life through rose-colored glasses or blinding oneself to the pain and imperfection of the world. Nor is happiness a state of exaltation to be perpetuated at all costs. It is the purging and letting go of mental toxins, such as hatred and obsession, that literally poison the mind. It is also about learning how to put things in perspective and reduce the gap between appearance and reality, cultivating wholesome qualities of mind and heart. That's the third one. The fourth one, again, you can notice we're sort of getting more and more subtle and deeper, and each of them, as we go, I don't know, we're going down, we go up. Let's call it going up, because that's sort of gives the sense of like, the sort of happiness of just ordinary pleasure and balance is supporting our capacity to follow the precepts, which is supporting our capacity to contemplate our virtues, which is supporting our capacity for concentration. Sometimes when we have trouble with concentration, it's because we haven't cultivated some of these earlier, they're not earlier in time, I don't know how to say it, but they're these earlier, if you will, qualities. And so we can't concentrate because we're kind of preoccupied at these other layers. For example, if we can't concentrate sometimes because we don't have enough tranquility. So sometimes in order to improve our concentration, we really need to kind of drop into maybe a kindness practice or a compassion practice, or, some kind of heart practice. So concentration, Ajahn Thanissaro refers to one of the images I love. He talks about a post by the ocean. I think it might be the Buddha's image as well. I can't remember. But a post that's like really set deeply in the ocean. I was thinking of that, during the hurricane. The pier that I'm most familiar with is Jeanette's Pier down at the Outer Banks, and it has fallen apart in storms more times than anybody wants to remember. And they finally built these like concrete pillars deep into the ocean. Doesn't mean it's never going to fall apart, but it's a lot stronger than that one that you saw washing around in the waves. That we can kind of build these like little flimsy little things, but then a storm comes and it breaks it down again. And we can say, oh, what's wrong with me because I'm just such a bad practitioner? It's because, the concentration, the stability of our practice isn't strong enough yet to be able to withstand a strong wind. Fine, okay, no problem. But then we look to see, how can I cultivate this kind of happiness? The happiness of having stability. Some of you have commented on my stability, with Hugh not here. And mercifully, thank you Jesus, thank you Buddha, that for whatever reasons, it is true that I've been perfectly happy to do this. Even though it would be so much more wonderful with you here. I know that, but sorry. That was rule number 512. We don't always get what we want. So we get this, and I'm perfectly happy doing it. It's fine. There's a stability to it that comes out. I was telling somebody this morning, I said, let it inspire you, because this is not about me. It's not personal. It's the fruit of our practice. It's yours too. You can have this too. So this concentration, this ability to have a post by the ocean so that when the storm comes, we're not flummoxed, we're not thrown off. This is Tanisaro. He says, gain, loss, loss of status, praise, criticism, pleasure, pain. These things are constantly raining down on us. And most people are out in the open, totally exposed, with no protection at all. So the mind is totally overwhelmed by whatever storms come its way, hoping that the good things will last, sort of hoping, wishing, I hope, and that the bad things will stay away. It's trying to dodge the bad raindrops and gather up the good ones. Doesn't work. So part of concentration is cultivating restraint. When we see the mind move into habitual patterns, that we invite ourselves to not do that. That's what's meant by renunciation. I was in France not too long ago, and I learned while I was there that one of the products of the Me Too movement is that people say, no, 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 a no. My husband said he's really sorry they told me that. No, 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 a no. So the invitation of the concentration practice is when we find ourselves doing something that's not skillful, like judging ourselves, criticizing ourselves, calling ourselves names, comparing ourselves to others, telling ourselves how we're supposed to be, how we used to be yesterday, how we might be tomorrow, anticipating whatever's going to happen 4 million years in the future. That no, 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 and no. I've heard the Dalai Lama, somebody started a question, and he said, something like, I know, I don't even remember what he was saying, but he was criticizing himself, and the Dalai Lama said, stop. Don't do that. So concentration, being able to see what's coming up that's not so skillful and letting it go. That's called renunciation. Letting it go. And then mindfulness. Mindfulness. The happiness of seeing clearly what is leads to insight, leads to seeing impermanence, trusting it, trusting that we're not in charge of the universe. It's okay. Every single one of you has had that experience. Where the sky, the clouds part, you see clearly, you get it. Sometimes it only lasts this long, at least for me. It lasts like this long. But we see it. We see it. We see what's true. We see where happiness is. And it's nourishing. And so our whole practice really is about cultivating the capacity to have that happen more reliably. To be able to rest in a happiness that is independent of conditions. Completely independent of conditions. That is our birthright, and that is what the Buddha says we have available to us at every given moment. I need to shorten this up or Bill's going to get on my case. No, I've already gone too long, I'm sorry. So the ultimate goal is delight in opening to the vastness, the mystery, the wonderfulness, in spite of the horribleness and the horribleness, just delight in opening to life and to the goodness of our own being and the goodness of awakening. We learn that there is a delightful, blissful place inside of you, not outside. We can realize that most people don't experience anything that isn't just that first level, one of the 6 sense contacts. The most important insight is that all we are looking for in the whole world we carry within us, and it's useless to keep looking outward into the whole world. As long as we are dependent on outer conditions, we are not free. Having dependence on outer conditions generates fear. This doesn't mean that we don't allow pleasant sense contact. It means that we don't run after them or try to keep them or imagine that that's the only kind of happiness. That's ayakima. And this is Pema Chodron, and I'll stop. Joy has to do with seeing how big, how completely unobstructed, and how precious things are. How totally precious. Resentment, bitterness, and holding a grudge prevent us from seeing and hearing and tasting and delighting in that preciousness. So may all of us, may everything that happens for us, Nibbana Pachaya Hotu, may this become a cause for awakening. That's the joy that is the ground of our being. May it be true for all of us.